Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, your host. So glad you could join me. We are going back to Pheasant Fest. Yes, we are back to Pheasant Fest for some expert advice on all things e-collars from my friend and wise man, guru in that world, Pete Fisher, pro dog trainer, representative of Dogtra, the innovators in that world, and we'll be learning a little bit of, well, everything from how to use your collar in different ways to what we shouldn't and should do with those collars that we might be doing wrong. That'll be the highlight of the day for me. I'm looking forward to figuring out what I'm doing that I could be doing differently. We've got lots more, of course, including our Handle It segment, where I'll outline some of the lesser-known places that I've had to exercise my dog in recent years. You will talk about the upside to preserve hunts. Yeah, just hear me out on that one. So lots to talk about, all made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care products, Pointer shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, and FindBirdHuntingSpots.com. Yeah, been on the road a bit, and one of the things that constantly amazes me when I'm out there is how little public land there is in, well, what I'll call southern and western California. Yeah, we all know the desert side, the east side, where there's virtually unlimited acreage when it comes to Bureau of Land Management in particular, but on top of everything else, the tourists, the tourist trade, the private sector, if you will, is taking a lot of the ground from the areas that we would in many other states be able to hunt or at least run our dog free of a leash or a check cord or anything else. It was tough, but we made some progress on that. And in fact, in one place, I was walking Flick on a lead on a golf course cart path. Ultimately got kicked off of it. But that's another story. While we were coming around one of the corners, son of a gun, if there isn't a covey of valley quail. I looked down and he's already on point. So we turned it into a little training steadiness opportunity, and it worked pretty well. So even the worst of times can become the best of times once in a while if you just keep an open mind there. You, on the other hand, have got plenty of other things to do, and you've been talking about it a lot these days. I've done a study of this, and yes, I do spend some time at hunting preserves and lodges all over the country. That's where you always have birds, because that's what you need for a bird dog TV show. But, recently I asked you in my weekly newsletter how many of you have gone to a hunting preserve or a lodge in the last year or two, and a goodly percent, almost 50% of you said yes. So I thought it'd be interesting to ask everybody if there is an upside to running your dog at a hunting preserve. And some interesting and possibly eye-opening or educational comments from people like Jeff Johnson, who says, I run my dog on one as a guide. They say birds make a bird dog. Mine takes the reps right to the open field and performs. And also, by the way, it's a good way to get new hunters hooked. Absolutely true, Jeff. Nick Bates says, and I think we'd all agree on this, there's no substitute for wild birds, but if wild birds have been giving a dog a hard time, you can help their confidence by shooting a few birds on a preserve hunt. Get them fired up again. Yeah, absolutely true. In fact, I took a phone call while I was on the road from a friend who needs to work on what I'll call gun sensitivity with his young dog, and we talked about ways to use preserve birds correctly, in the right way, judiciously, after deep and thorough consideration. So, anyway, you know what I mean, Manuel. Eric Digger Rife says, your dogs will be happy. They don't know the difference. And, that's an argument for another day as well, but it's absolutely true. I think that a bird smells like a bird. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. Brett Nichols says, I enjoy both wild birds and a preserve. My dogs know the difference between preserve and hunting out west. Now, that's different. The birds are the same, but that big, wide open country is way different than the more compact experience of a preserve. My friend Ken Corbett says, of course, great birds, habitat, and camaraderie. That's absolutely right. You can get those. You could shop carefully for a great lodge or preserve. You'll get those. And then shop carefully for a good hunting buddy, and you'll get the third one. And Chris Bailey says, more benefits than not. The dog is not learning a damn thing on your couch. A good way to sum it up, absolutely. Hey, thanks for all your comments on that and all the other stuff we do on social media. And by the way, thank you if you are following me on Instagram these days. I think it's Wing Shooting USA or Scott Linden Wing Shooting. Anyway, whatever it is, thanks a lot. Adding 50 followers a week over there. That's flattering, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, we are brought to you in part by PointerShotguns.com. Take a look at their entire lineup of guns from the kind of entry level all the way up to those new case-colored side-by-sides. Yeah, it's all at PointerShotguns.com. See what you like, find a nearby retailer, watch some of my videos and read some of my articles, but mainly take a look at drool over it. Yeah, you will. Those new side-by-sides. All the other models, including those Cerakoted in cool colors that'll make you the envy of everybody at the range and in the field. So learn more about Pointer Shotguns right there, PointerShotguns.com. And once you get one, take good care of it by going to SageandBreaker.com. Get all your gun cleaning and care consumables and heirloom quality, I'll just call them carry items, for lack of a better term. The new range bag, going great guns, pardon the pun. Also, shotgun and even rifle cases. Your cleaning accoutrements can be assembled into one single spot and organized very carefully with their cleaning rug, if you will. It's now available is that range bag. Don't miss out on future sales. You could have heard about it before everybody else if you just signed up for the email list at SageandBreaker.com.
That sounds great.
What an opening right there. And he's absolutely right. I'm Scott Linden here at the Minneapolis Pheasant Fest and Quail Classic with a guy who does sound pretty good most of the time. Very smart guy. Pete Fisher is with Dogtra. You recognize that brand. We'll talk about the products that they carry and how to use them more efficiently very soon. But first off, we are opening the last day of the show here. And so if you didn't get here, we'll try and capture some of the flavor of that as well. But Pete, welcome to the Upland Nation podcast.
Thanks for having me again. I'm losing track of how many times I've been on, but this
No.
is the first to be on at Pheasant Fest, so thank you for having me here.
Well, it is. There's an energy level here that you don't get on the phone, and it's been fun the whole time, and it'll be fun this time, I'm almost positive. So tell me about your position at Dogtra and how you help them help us.
You know, that's a great question, and I got introduced here a while back at a rep group training, Scott, and the individual introduced me as Pete Fisher, senior consultant. And to describe what Pete does, he said, Pete's kind of like the Swiss Army knife for Dogtra. So I can do a little bit of everything. Might be the best way to describe what I do at Dogtra. But to be a little more specific, I do some of everything in regards to I help them design the product. I help them test the product. We have a fairly large, what we call field staff. Some companies call it a pro staff. But it's a mixture of individuals that are in the industry, that are serious amateur trainers, professional trainers, obviously, and hopefully from all sectors, retrievers, pointers, canine, pet dog world, and I help manage that aspect of it as well. So I do it remotely for the most part from my home office in Albany, Minnesota, where I was born and raised and was in the retriever training business for more years than I want to admit.
Okay, now don't hold that against him, everybody.
So yeah, and most, I would like to say any large trade show that you might find Dogtra having a presence at, many times you will find me there working. And so my roots go very deep to Pheasants Forever, to say the least, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I'm here at Pheasant Fest and working a booth for Dogtra with a staff this weekend.
Yeah, so just on that note, we've been open for 2 days. You're sitting there on one side of the table fielding questions of all sorts from any number of folks who own dogs of one sort or another. What are some of the most common questions?
Well, we get a fair amount of questions, but we get a fair amount of positive comments about our product. And people will stop by and say, that's the unit I use. They'll bring individuals by, friends, hunting partners, say, this is the unit I use. Pete, talk to them about it, give them an explanation. That's probably the most common statement and that we get working a booth. And I really enjoy that, because that speaks volumes about the product and the customer service. Yeah. But we do get individuals that stop by that, would be having, as you're well aware of, the pheasant is a running bird. If it has the opportunity to outrun the dog and the hunter, that's what it prefers to do. And of course, the dog that learns to track that pheasant running also learns that if he keeps on going, he gets to chase it in the air, but if he's too far out, he doesn't get rewarded with the retrieve. So that's where the remote training collar, or the e-collar as we call it, back many, many years ago, and some of the people that are anti-remote training collar still call them a shock collar. And it works on static electricity, so it does give you a shock. But it's very harmless, but very efficient in the way it can control a dog and keep that dog from running out the end of the field chasing the pheasant, and the hunter gets frustrated and has a dog that's out of control. So really, we sell a lot of product in the pheasant hunting market, and what better place can we be than at Pheasants Forever?
You bring up an interesting point, and I've had this conversation at least 3 times here at Pheasant Fest this year. I know a guy whose dog will swing wide around that pheasant and head him off at the pass and push that bird back to me, or a variation on that. Somebody also described a running ruffed grouse, and what did he call it? He called it playing with the grouse.
Circle the wagons.
Yeah, but you bring up probably the pointer man's bane, and that is a pointer that will creep, track, and always get a little farther away from the handler and too close to the pheasant. So, in a nutshell, you're not training me to train my dog, but tell me, what are the basic components of trying to work that dog ultimately to be able to handle that running bird a little better?
Well, a great question, and the way I explain this to individuals before we take the dog out and just put a remote training collar on him and start correcting him out in the field and trying to get this dog under control, we have to take this dog and condition him to the response that we want from the remote training collar. So the remote training collar is used to reinforce commands the dog already knows. So first the dog has to know the commands before you start using any kind of negative reinforcement followed by positive reinforcement. That's, in my opinion, and many dog trainers that you would sit down and talk to, that is the basis of training a dog, and then a lot of repetition. So before we take that dog out in the field and start using the electric training collar on him, we have to do that in a controlled environment where the dog understands that sensation of the remote training collar. And so that's really a big part of it that I emphasize when I'm working with somebody, or if I'm explaining to them across a booth how this needs to be done, because it's part scientific, but it's also where a lot of common sense comes into play.
Yeah.
And how we've got to handle this dog and how we have to establish this bond and teach the dog before we take him out in the field and use this product on him.
You said scientific. I'm going to say psychological because I just finished a script for a video that I'm going to cut on this very topic, and I was reminded again of how important it is for dogs to learn these things without a collar first, in the yard, on the check cord, on the lead, on the table, whatever it is, and then you start overlaying these things. Is that the right way to describe that?
It is. That would be a good way to explain it. The foundation for all of our dog training, whether it's a pet dog being obedience trained, whether it's a field dog that's going to be out chasing some pheasants up or pointing some pheasants, or a dog that's running in competitions for a field trial title or a hunt test title. The basis or the basic obedience is our foundation for all of our training. And I always give the similarity to building a house. If I haven't put down a good foundation and I just start putting the walls up in the roof, we're going to have problems because I haven't laid a good foundation underneath it. So it really is important. Our foundation is obedience training before we start any remote training collar.
And you say obedience training. By the way, I stole that word foundation and used it several times in the accompanying article to that video I'm going to do. But the idea that obedience, I'm making air quotes there, is sit, stay, come. It is all that. But then it's all sorts of other things. And you might know Bob Ferris, great poodle pointer trainer, NAVTA judge, etc. Bob's a great guy, and I've trained with him a lot. Thanks, Bob. He really opened my eyes to that, and I'm going to give you one example. He says a dog runs into the scent cone, slams a point. That's instinct. It becomes obedience the moment he realizes he's got to work for the handler from that point on. So you need to train the steadiness as if it's an obedience command as well.
Yes.
And I'll take it a step further and say, okay, so the command may or may not be, whoa. It may be the scent alone. It may be the sight of the bird. It might be the sound of the bird as it flushes. It might be all sorts of things. I know one trainer who teaches his dog to stop when he hears the guy scuff his feet in the gravel. It's kind of a cheat in the field trial world, I think. But anyway, all those things are just commands.
Correct.
Instead of saying, whoa. Am I on the right track there?
You are. And I might explain it this way from the retriever world, is that if we get a retriever that likes to retrieve, we want a dog that has good drive and instinct to do it. If we left that dog in an untrained environment and he found a bird, or we shot a bird for that dog, he or she, the dog is going to run out there and do one of a couple things. He's going to run out there and eat it, go dig a hole and bury it.
Have you been watching my videos?
And go bury it to eat later.
Yeah.
So the natural instinct is to chase it.
Yeah.
The obedience part comes in teaching the dog to bring it back to me for my table. So it is a mixture of, we want a dog that has good natural ability, but we want to play on that natural ability, but it all revolves back to obedience.
Yeah.
And so that would just be a very basic situation or an example of a dog that a retriever really is maybe a poor name to call them a retriever, because they don't naturally, all of them, bring stuff back to you.
Yeah, I know.
They like to chase it, but the retrieve, the bring back to hand is a trained part of what we do with these dogs.
So there's another obedience
Correct.
command, if you will. You know, my wife, when she was deeper into the agility world and training her corgis, some really good trainer, thank you, Jan, used the term impulse control. And you just described the impulse. I want to eat it, I want to bury it and eat it later. The last thing I want to do is what he wants me to do. That's the impulse.
Correct.
I need to be told that I can't really do that. At some point I have to work with that human.
Correct.
You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. That's Pete Fisher with Dogtra. You know those folks as the electronic collar and training guys. I'm Scott Linden. We're here at the Minneapolis version of Pheasant Fest and the Quail Classic, closing out today on the floor. So if you're if you're listening and you didn't come by and say hello, I won't hold it against you. Next year we'll see you in Sioux Falls, I think.
Correct.
Pete, what is the biggest use for a Dogtra collar that we don't think about? And I'll share some of mine I've learned over the years from other people usually. But we talk about it, expanding the repertoire of things you can do with an e-collar. Tell me one that most of us may not know.
Well, I think there's a number of them, but I think what I need to touch on first, Scott, is what the most common use is of it. And the most common use is getting your dog to come back when it's called. And a dear friend of mine, and he's if he hears me say this, he's going to cringe a little bit. And we talked to him earlier, is Tom Dokken. And Tom and I were talking one day, and he made the statement. He said, "A dog that does not come when it's called eventually is a dog that's in trouble."
Yeah.
And that is the most common problem that we see with a rough dog, a dog that's had no training whatsoever, is that the dog is just being a dog, Scott.
Yeah.
So that is the most common use from not only the hunting dog world, but also the pet dog world. When I was in the dog training business, many times I would do pet dog training for individuals, and let's say the lady would bring the dog out and she would say, "I'm so frustrated. I'm so tired of every time the door opening up and the dog getting out the back door, I've got to run for the minivan keys," is what a woman said to me one day. And there's a lot of truth to that. But the recall is the most important command in any sector, and that's pet dog, canine, retriever, pointer, and to Tom's point is a dog that does not consistently come when called is eventually a dog that's going to be in trouble. But one of the things that we run into is people don't understand is that how you can use the remote training collar beyond that. And so one thing that a lot of individuals don't understand a use for, the average person, is, as again in the retriever world, we use the remote training collar to reinforce 3 different commands. Come to me, that I just explained, go stationary, which is a sit position, and go away from me, such as into a kennel, a boat, back of my pickup. So that's a 3-step process that we all condition dogs to do when we put them through an e-collar conditioning program. And so one thing that a lot of individuals don't understand is how we can take that remote training collar and use it for steadiness. Again, I come from the retriever world, how we can get a dog that sits nice at our side in the blind while the ducks are hovering over the decoys and the guns are going off and the calls are going off. There's a lot of distractions, a lot of opportunity for this dog to break, is what we call it. So we use the remote training collar on a light tap to get the dog with his hind end back down on and stay on the ground, stay in that position so he doesn't break on the birds, not only ruin the hunt by running in front of the gun and out into the bird field or the pond, but also a safety factor as well. So, and when I work with people that don't have a lot of knowledge on the remote training collar, they'll say, "My gosh, you used it to," we were only using it to get him to come when he's called. But we use it in a full process of 3 steps. Come to me, go stationary, go away from me. Once the dog has been through that conditioning process, now we get a dog, once he stops at our side and sits on commands, we'll take a light stimulation, then he'll do it at 10 feet. Then he'll do it at 20 feet. Then he'll do it at 20 yards. And eventually we work a dog up that is going to be a performance dog that would run in a hunt test or field trial, a ribbon runner, let's call him, or a well-trained handling gun dog. That's the dog that you see 100 yards, 150, 200 yards out in the field, stops, turns on a whistle, casts left, right, and back, and goes back and finds that bird that's been knocked down and sailed away.
You're talking all around what the revelation to me, and there are any number of ways to use an electronic collar, from aversion to positive reinforcement to what I think it's really doing quite often, and that is interrupting a dog's train of thought and controlling that impulse I talked about earlier. Am I on the right track? You used that dog in the blind situation. I think that's what you're really doing there. Am I right?
You're correct. We're tapping him on the shoulder, so to speak, and saying, let's not forget our obedience commands, because I want you to sit and wait until I give you the cue to go and get your reward, which, for a Labrador Retriever, as an example, is to go out and get the bird and bring it back and get praise from the owner. So yes, it's that opportunity to interrupt that dog's thought process when he's might be ready to go into high drive mode and go chasing. And then it gives us the opportunity to do it at a distance, Scott.
Yeah.
Whereas, and there's all these run on FM radio frequencies. So the dog, he can be 10 feet from me sitting in another blind, and I can still tap, tap, tap to remind him if he's starting to get antsy and going to break. So, yes, it gives us the opportunity to interrupt that thought process or that point where that dog is going to break or not come when he's called, like I said earlier, or break out the end of a field after a bunch of pheasants or a deer. Now we got him out on a busy road, that kind of thing. So it really is, it's all about just getting more control over our dog, but also being able to implement that control at a distance.
We joke about it. We call it a hearing aid sometimes, and at a distance, that's to a large degree the effect we get out of it. And before we conclude this segment, I just want to riff on that for a moment, because you just got me another thought, Pete Fisher of Dogtra, and that is what we're trying to do to a large degree is just remind them. We're not trying to punish them. So the best thing we can do is know when that dog is about ready to lose control of his impulse. Do you have any tells, just like a poker player or a dog? And I look at mine and I know when he's ready to take a command, because even if he's 100 yards out, he's looking at me a little bit as he's running past or whatever. How about some other tells that a dog is showing that might indicate, first off, that he's about ready to lose control of his impulse or is ready to take a command?
Well, every dog is different.
Yeah.
And what I would, the best analogy I can make is it's almost like you and I being out duck hunting or pheasant hunting. We have to learn our lead on any particular bird and the angle it's coming from. Yeah. You have to be able to read your dog. You have to be able to understand when that dog might be breaking. And quite frankly, Scott, some of these dogs may not ever give you any kind of warning. But a lot of it, in my opinion, has to do with reading your dog. And that comes from spending a lot of time with them, but also spending a lot of time training that dog. And I'm a big proponent of a lot of preseason training. Early dog, young dog work is really important. And I think I mentioned this on your last podcast, is I'm doing a dog demonstration for a youth group, Pheasants Forever youth group, and I had about 150 kids there and their parents, and I got talking about how the importance of training a dog before you ever take them in the field. And the analogy I made was, how many of you in the group play youth baseball? And almost every one of them, girls and boys, raised their hand that they played baseball. And I said, how many of you go to baseball practice? And again, all of them raised their hand. And the analogy I make is these kids go to practice many, 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 many times before they actually play in a game. And we use the same analogy with a dog. We just shouldn't be taking a dog out in the field, putting him in a hunting situation without practicing. And the analogy that I ultimately use is, if you didn't take your kid to practice and he fortunately or unfortunately got a hit his first time up or her first time up, and got the ball hit in the field, he wouldn't know to run to first base, second base, or the parking lot. So there is a reason that we do all this training before we ever take him in the field.
That's Pete Fisher with Dogtra, the electronic collar company. Exciting things soon to come from them. I can't wait to be able to talk about them more. I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast from Pheasant Fest. Yeah, next year we'll see you in Sioux Falls. In the meanwhile, we'll be right back. We've got a lot more coming up on the Upland Nation podcast, so don't go away. We have more from Pete Fisher, wisdom and advice on everything e-collar and dog training oriented, from a guy who's been there and done that as a pro. In fact, some great stories off mic as well. We'll also talk to you about the Handle It segment and where you might want to run your dog when there's no place to run your dog. Yeah, so stick around for all of that and more right here on the Upland Nation podcast. We're brought to you in part by TrulockChokes.com. If you're one of the many folks who prefers to extend one's upland season into turkey hunting season, great news. All the pinhoti turkey chokes at TrulockChokes.com are now 15% off, so stock up. get the one that's going to get the gobbler for you. It's all at TrulockChokes.com. If you get the newsletter, follow the link right there. If you don't, just go to TrulockChokes.com and they'll tell you how to take 15% off your turkey choke order through April. Learn more at TrulockChokes.com. And once you're done there, visit us at findbirdhuntingspots.com. There's always something new there, whether it's dog training advice or another way for you to access public ground. Those are the two primary subjects there at findbirdhuntingspots.com. It's also a good place to get a link to the new Upland Nation webinar on public access. About an hour's worth of information there. Learn more at findbirdhuntingspots.com. Welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast. Scott Linden here, Pete Fisher with Dogtra there. We're on the floor of Pheasant Fest and the Quail Classic, and just covering a whole bunch of really interesting things. And Pete, I want to carry on with the discussion. I talked about years ago. I asked a question on social media. I said, "How else do you use your electronic collar?" And when I say e-collar, I mean all the stuff that's attached to it, almost literally bells and whistles and things like that. And one good friend of mine said, in the grouse woods, I'll use the beeper as a recall tool. And I get it, and it makes a lot of sense, and I've seen other people do the same. What about other things in that? I call it the repertoire of tools that are attached to a dog's neck. Could we use?
Sure. Well, almost every remote training collar that Dogtra Company makes has what we call the pager vibration.
Yeah.
And that is what we call a non-static, it's just a buzz or a vibration, no different than your phone vibrating in your pocket when you get a text message or a call. And so we can use that as a form as an attention getter, and we could use it many different ways, Scott. We could use it out in the field. Let's say a dog is coming in and pointing a bird and going to catwalk or creep on it. You could use the pager to firm that up if he's been trained in a controlled environment to know what that pager is all about. You could use it for what I call a silent recall. A lot of canine people use this, so they put a bite dog in a building, and this dog is running all over searching for the bad guy, let's call him, and let's say the person is not in there, and now they want the dog back out, is they've taught this silent recall command using the pager rather than using the static stimulation to bring that dog back out of the building. You could use it the same way with a flushing dog, provided they've been trained ahead of time to understand what that cue means of the pager vibration. But yeah, every unit we make almost comes with that nowadays.
I love it, and that reminds me of a topic I've written and talked about before, and that is stealth in the field. Mm-hmm. You know, and yesterday I had a conversation or two about how jumpy wild birds can get if they hear a truck door slam or too many whistles or somebody screaming at their dog 100 yards away. That's a perfect example of that. And I don't use it quite that way, but I think I might start overlaying a command right there because I like the idea of being able to use the vibrator in another way. Of course, like you said, and just for the record, all this stuff starts in the yard on the table with a check cord and a lead and all of that. They got to learn it that way first.
Correct. In a controlled environment before we take them out and put them in the playing field, so to speak, out on the football field or the baseball diamond. Yeah. The dog has to have that foundation work to understand it before we ever get to that point. Mm-hmm. But the beeper locator is another feature that we have on quite a few of our units and is extremely popular with the pheasant hunter. And so much of the cover nowadays, at least in my area, is native prairie grasses. On a good year, it's very thick, and the dog gets 10 yards from you, Scott, and you don't know where he is anymore, or she. And so the beeper locator, I can give a couple taps, and it gives an audible beep, so now I know where the dog is at. Because many of these dogs hunt so fast, especially when they come right out of the box and they're fresh, okay? My old uncle Fritz Opitz used to take his hard-charging Labrador and he'd let him out a mile prior to the hunting spot and let him run behind the car. And that was before the remote training collar came on the scene many years ago. But now we take this dog out and we turn him loose in the field, and he's gone. You know, he's coming out hot. He's full of energy, and you've lost him already.
Yep.
And you don't know where in the heck he's gone. The beeper locator gives me the ability to tap that a few times, and I can say, geez, he's only that 10 yards away yet, or he's 110, because you know how fast these dogs can move. That is, I think, in the last 20 years, the beeper locator for keeping track of your dog in the uplands, whether you're in the grouse woods or if you're up in the pheasant fields up at my place or out in the Dakotas, that is, I think, probably one of the biggest features we've added to this product. And we've taken ours and mounted it down into the receiver box. So it's very, it's not a great big block sitting up on top of the dog's neck that can get caught on fences when they go underneath it. But that one particular feature, I think, is a game changer. And the pheasants probably have hated it because now the hunter can keep track of where his dog is at in the field.
You know, you've inspired me. I'm going to tell you one story, but before I do, Fritz Opus would be a great name for a metal band. I'll give you one testimonial. So we were hunting not too far from here near Watertown, South Dakota, several seasons ago, and it was a pond with a bunch of cattails, and it was very small, but we were looking for pheasants, of course, and couldn't find the dog. Still couldn't find the dog. And you know he's not moving because there's no rustling in the cattails, and so son of a gun, I start beeping, and I'm kind of vectoring in based on the beep, and I am literally 2 feet from the dog before I realize he's 2 feet from me. Mm-hmm. And he's on a point, and I'm looking at him, and then I'm thinking, that's a funny looking point. And then I kind of part the cattails, and at the other end of the point, at the nose end of the point, is a raccoon pointing my dog. And you know what happens next. So the raccoon doesn't have a collar. I can't do anything to him, so I can grab the wire hair and pull him off as the raccoon makes a dash for the other side of the pond. Everybody came out of it fine. We killed a pheasant later that day in the same cattails. But those are the things that really help us in the field. And we, again, but let's talk about that beeper for just a moment more. He's got to learn about that. I mean, I don't care where it is on the collar, but by the way, I love that it's down here and not up here because it's farther from their ears.
Correct.
And they got enough problems with that, shooting over them and everything. But we just check me on this. We need to teach them, first off, what a beeper sounds like so they don't freak out when they're already 200 yards away. And second off, that it is an extension of your vocal cords in many cases.
Correct. The beeper, some dogs, you could get away with putting it on them, and they wouldn't give it a second thought, Scott.
Yeah.
Many other dogs, you would want to condition them to that sound because it is fairly loud.
Yeah.
And again, it is something new to the dog. The dog, it's not like we walk over and we take it out of the box and we show them the box and we say, this is the new beeper locator. Dogs don't learn on that level. Otherwise, we'd sit a book or a video out in front of them every night and we'd never train them. We just let them learn by watching and reading. So we have to take it out. Some dogs that would show some concern over that beeper, I may just put it in the point mode where it's going to beep every so many seconds. I might hang it up on his collar and just leave it there, Scott.
Yeah, well, hold it. You said collar, but you were up here like this. Your hand was up here.
Up in the kennel.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. So not even on him.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it is fairly loud also, Scott. And so let's say I did put it up there or just started doing a couple beeps where the dog was out running around, doing something positive, just having fun. Yeah. And if that dog put on the brakes and showed me that he was concerned about it, I might go and take a piece of duct tape and put it over the end of the speaker horn to cover it and muffle it even more. And then I would put it in that location up in the kennel or up in a room somewhere and then just make it part of the dog's life until
golden.
I put it on him.
That is, I've also put a ball of cotton in there before I put the duct tape on.
Yep.
All those things so that Well, like everything else, and distance is one. You know what I'm talking about here. If we're going to introduce gunfire, for example, we don't introduce it right over the dog's head.
Not a good idea.
He's at 50 yards, and it's a cap pistol, and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Same thing about volume.
Yes.
So I love that idea. You know, what is the biggest mistake we make when we're using an e-collar on a dog? Maybe not the first time, but at some point. I'm going to start. If you're pissed off, and I don't care if it's at the dog or your hunting buddy or the fact that there are no birds, put that thing in your pocket.
Yeah.
Beyond that, though, what are some of the stupid things we do?
Well, I think everything in life goes better if you have a good positive mindset to start with, whether that's driving down the freeway or training your dog. Okay, so I think that's very important what you just said. But the thing that I think is really important is when we don't get a lot of opportunities to go out and do the things that we want to do. So as an example, we're filled with, in a big room with lots of people that like to pheasant hunt. And we live in a world nowadays where we don't get a lot of time, Scott. And now you've taken that dog out and you want to go pheasant hunting and you've lost control over them. For whatever reason, maybe you didn't use the remote training collar, didn't ever have one. And so now you're frustrated because you've got this little window of time to do some things that you really want to enjoy and the dog has ruined it. So I think maybe to flip that question around a little bit, I think one of the biggest mistakes a lot of individuals make is not using the remote training collar at all, thinking that they can go naturally. And quite honestly, I've never met a dog that was worth his salt out in the field that didn't need a remote training collar. Yeah. And I'll share this real quick story with you. I have the remote training collar on my dog doing this dog demonstration I spoke about earlier for Pheasants Forever, a youth conservation group, and I'm got my master hunting retriever Trey with me, and the training collar's on him and the transmitter's in my pocket, and we're talking about just the things that we've been talking about on the podcast here. And they see the remote training collar. I talk about the remote training collar. I don't try and hide the remote training collar. I talk about it in a positive light and how the control I have over my dog and how it's built this dog into what you see here, a well-oiled hunting retriever. And there was a lady in the crowd, and she finally raised her hand and said, my dog will do all those things, but I don't use a remote training collar. And I said, well, that's good, that's nice. And then, but I said, you've got a heck of a dog. I use it, and just sit tight and watch and let me show and talk about what my dog can do. And she had a couple more questions, and I said, not to get too far off track here, but I want to address your questions. But let's do this. I'm going to be done here in about 30 minutes. You don't live too far away. You run home and get your dog. I'll be right here with my dog. Then we'll see. I don't want to hear stories anymore. I want to see what your dog will do. I don't know if I need to finish this story, but she never went and got her dog. So I think one of the biggest issues with individuals, let's say in the pheasant hunting world, is that they have got a fear of using the remote training collar. It's a powerful tool, Scott. You don't have to. It doesn't take any darn work at all. I just stand there and I can push buttons. But back in the day, in the early days, it got this stigma of being a shock collar.
Yeah.
And they were only one level of intensity, and that was high.
Yeah.
And so, but they've come a long way. I mean, in size, in features, we can dial the amount of stimulation down so it's barely even, you can barely feel it through your nerve endings. And the best analogy I can make is if you've ever used a TENS machine at a physical therapy or a chiropractor, it is the same principle as that. It's just that we've taken the FM signal from a transmitter to that receiver, and we can implement it without a bunch of wires connected to it. So I think it's the biggest issue is not so much what people have done with the remote training collar. I'd like to think that it's more that they're not been exposed properly to it, or still has that stigma.
Sure.
That it can burn a dog, it can shock a dog, and we could do a whole nother podcast about how a remote training collar can't burn a dog because they don't produce enough energy. But I think that's the biggest issue is that there's still a fair amount of people that they know they need it, but they're afraid to use it.
That's mind-boggling to think in this God, I can't believe I'm saying this. In this day and age, with so much of what you guys are telling us, you and your competitors, we're all friends.
Yeah.
That people still have that misconception, it means it must be true. There is a misconception out there, isn't there? Yeah.
Well, I guess if you tell a lie long enough, and if you're good at selling it, people believe you. But the remote training collar doesn't produce enough energy to burn tissue. But pressure necrosis sores are an issue anytime you hang anything around your neck.
So don't leave it on a long time.
Correct. I mean. There are some fitness devices, without naming names, out there that human beings have worn over the last 10 years and have gotten pressure necrosis sores. It's the equivalent of a bed sore, basically.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't produce enough energy to burn tissue. It's a great device if used properly, but that's like everything else in this world, Scott. And so we have a much better trained dog because of the remote training collar now than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because of the advancements not only in the product but the advancements in the training programs and how we implement them.
Yeah, let's leave it with that. If you're going to use a training collar, you need to be trained as well.
Correct.
And while it would be great to come in and give Pete a big pile of money and have him train you to use an electric collar, you can do it with the great support system that organizations like Dogtra.com have
Correct.
for you, and learn how to do it, and then learn your dog how to do it, if you will. I'm sorry, I sound like Jethro Clampett when I say it that way. But there is a learning curve for both sides of the current, of the signal, and then poof, you do have 1,000-yard check cord, and isn't that what we all want in life, in bird hunting life?
Exactly, and to that point with the check cord, there's been a kind of a war going on the internet, on social media, between the non-e-collar users and the e-collar users. And the one non-e-collar user, I saw him writing about, it was a pet dog trainer saying, my dog is, if I don't have control over him, if I get him in a situation, he's going to be on a long rope or a lead. Well, in the real world, Scott, that's just unrealistic, that my dog's going to be dragging around a 100-foot rope when I take him out in suburbia, or if I take him out in the pheasant field. I'm going to spend half of my day or all of my day unwinding rope out of the weeds and stuff. And that's not the case once we put the remote training collar on him. But to your point earlier, you made a really valid point, is that we have so much information out there at our fingertips now through the manufacturers of the remote training collars. But also, Scott, we have the Electronic Pet Manufacturers Association has a lot of information. It's called PETT. The Pet Electronics Training. That is the conglomeration of all of us, that we have an association, that we build good, solid products, that their safety levels are met, but we also provide a lot of information on how do we use this tool. And there's a lot of great information out there. All of the manufacturers produce good information nowadays. Yeah.
Well, let's leave it at that. If you want more information on the products and get ready for some new ones, Dogtra.com is where you learn all this. Pete Fisher, we got to do this on a way more regular basis. It was so fun, and I learned so much from you. Thanks for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast.
Scott, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been fun.
Handle it.
Our Handle It segment is next. We're going to talk about something that I've been facing a lot lately. Where do you run a dog when there's no place to run a dog? It's coming up on the Upland Nation podcast. Before we get to that, though, let me remind you that MidwayUSA.com is where you can watch some of my videos exclusively and read some of my articles. Again, you won't find them anywhere else. These are things I'm doing just for MidwayUSA.com. Everything from how to pick a puppy to some of the early puppy training things you want to do. A little bit of everything, going into some of that e-collar topic as well, and what I've learned over the years. So check it all out at MidwayUSA.com. They carry just about everything for shooting, hunting, and the outdoors. And they're doing their darndest to serve the upland bird hunting and bird dog community as well now. So take a long look at MidwayUSA.com. And once you got all your gear, you want to test it all out, swing on by if you're near Western Oregon somewhere just off Interstate 5. Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School in the lovely, wonderful town of Jervis, Oregon, near Salem. Whether you want to take a claycation and park your RV there for a few days, as I've done, take a lesson, shop the pro shop, including the incredible selection of guns they have at midvalleyclays.com. That's where you learn more about all of that stuff. Schedule your instructional time or just come on out and shoot some of the many clay target games they have there. It's all available to you at midvalleyclays.com. Yeah, when you travel, maybe it's a little bit easier for us out in the West, but it's a problem no matter where you go. If you got a bird dog that needs a lot of run and there's no open space, what's a guy going to do? Well, the first thing a guy does is invest in one of those chuck-it kind of launchers for tennis balls, because that is probably a godsend to most of us. You can throw that tennis ball in any number of places, and a lot of dogs will chase it forever. But if you're looking for a place to do all that, and you can't find the open space, or the open space is not available to a free-running dog, what do you do? Well, here are some places I've found over the years that work pretty well. Downtown Reno, Nevada, of all places, a closed shopping mall had a gigantic parking lot behind the mall that was virtually fenced in. You get up early enough and there's nobody there, and you can run your dog out there till hell freezes over. And in Reno, that's pretty often. You can Google schools, parks, and then another term to use on Google is open space. Found one of those in Paso Robles, California recently. It was not a park. It was not a school. It was just called a so-and-so open space. So check all those out via Google Maps. Some of those big corporate parks in some of the more urbanized areas are more like a park than some urban parks. And again, some may be closed, but some may be open, especially if you get up early enough. So browse your Google map. You might get pleasantly surprised. I found reservoir accesses. There's all sorts of hidden public spaces or even private spaces. And I believe in Little League. I built Little League fields. I played Little League. Sometimes they'll even let you run your dog there. And boy, oh boy, what a great surprise. Take you back to your own baseball career. So check it all out. Thanks a lot for all the folks who have hosted me and Flick over the years, running in places where we couldn't find anywhere else to run. Now, this is where we get to say thank you to Pete Fisher of Dogtra for all your... Hey, Pete, you are a guru. Thank you so much for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast. All of you who commented at the social platforms and whose contributions are definitely worthwhile. Appreciate that. If you left a rating or a review, that's how we grow. Thank you very much. And our sponsors, SageandBreaker.com, PointerShotguns.com, MidValleyClays.com, and TrulockChokes.com. I invite you to take a look at FindBirdHuntingSpots.com as well, where you will always find something new and something worthwhile. Yeah, it's a funny time of year for all of us, but we've got plenty to do, whether it's cleaning the truck or training the dog. So thanks again for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden. I'll see you at the range.